Welcome back to this part 2 of our module on vApps, clones, and templates. In this module, I'll start off the discussion with templates before moving on to content libraries. We'll discuss a few of those things before moving on to the vSphere web client where we will demonstrate them. Okay, so what are templates? We basically use a template when we are seeking standardization in our OS and applications. So we could quickly deploy a new VM whilst at the same time protecting that master image that we're deploying that VM from. Due to the fact that you cannot power on a template, um, we are basically preventing unnecessary changes from being made to that master image. Okay, if we do need to make some changes or inject some changes into that, we cannot just power the template on and add those changes. We would need to convert that template, or yes, convert that to VM. Say we need to apply some new updates to that master image. We would convert that to VM, apply our updates before converting it back to a template. Okay, so for deploying templates, we have three options. We could either clone a VM to template. We could clone a template in our content library, clone to a template in our content library, sorry. And finally, we could convert a VM to a template. Okay, so we will demonstrate this in a little bit. Okay, next let's move on to OVF templates. Our virtual machines and our vApps, both of them can be exported as either a open virtualization format, OVF file, or a group of files, sorry, or the open virtualization format archive, OVA file. Okay, so these are the two options where we could export our VM. For OVF are basically a set of files. If we were to do an export of OVF, think of the F here as folder. So basically a folder of files. These are the three files that would be exported. We know about our VMDK. That would be our hard disk for our virtual machine. We would have an actual OVF file, and we would have a manifest file here. Okay. So the .ovf, these three would be stored as .ovf, .vmdk, and .mf. The .ovf file, this is the main document for our OVF package. All right. So this would contain the metadata, and it would have links in that to other files in the package. Okay, other files like the vmdk. So this would basically point back to the vmdk. The MF file, or the manifest file, this is used to verify the integrity of the entire OVF package. So it contains a SHA-1 digest of all the files in the package except for the manifest file itself. Okay, so basically we would need to name, or when we generate the OVF, these files would need to have the same base name. So an example of this would be, we would have vm1.ovf, vm1.vmdk, and vm1.mf, sorry. So other than these three having the same base name, we would also need them to be in the same directory for this to work if you are deploying back an OVF. All right. So the other option we have is the OVA. This is where our template is exported as a single file rather than separate files like the OVF format. And this would be easier for us to move and transport, or if you need to share this. All right. Sometimes what you would have is vendors selling you appliances with the OVA extension. So you might even have the vApp deployed like this. So you basically would bring that into your infrastructure, and it might be a couple virtual machines in there already to deploy. So we just import that OVA into our infrastructure and power it on. All right. So we'll get to that, how we deploy OVA, in a little bit. All right. So next I want to discuss content library. This is a new feature of vSphere 6. Content library basically is a repository for storing our virtual machines, or vApps, things like our templates, our ISOs and scripts. It would allow contents to be shared. Once we deploy a content library, it would allow contents to be shared across multiple vCenter servers. And this basically would require a vCenter server to start with. Okay, so you would have to have a vCenter server in your infrastructure before you could deploy this, and you would need to be running vSphere 6.0. All right. So let's discuss the three types of content libraries that we could create. To start with, we have local. This is where our files would be available to the current vCenter server only, or your current vSphere environment that you're deploying this content library inside. The publish content library. This is where you would make your files that are stored in your content library. This is where you'll make them available to your current vSphere environment and to other vCenter servers. Okay, so that's if you want to share that, you would deploy a publish content library. And finally, we could subscribe to a publish content library. You would just enter your address and subscribe to one that was already shared out. Okay. So next, what I want to do is we'll pull up our vSphere web client and demonstrate a couple of these things that we would have discussed. Okay, so let me just pull up my vSphere web client here so we could discuss a couple of these things and demonstrate them. We are in our VMs and templates view here. I have a couple small VMs that would be ideal for us to move around. So let's work with our DSL VM. If you were to right click on this VM, these are where we would see our template options under clone and templates. So if we go to clone, one of the options here we have here is clone to template. The other option is clone to template in our content library. So we'll get to that just now. We'll go ahead and set up a content library and then come back to the second option. Okay, so let me just demonstrate how we go about creating a template, clone into a template. Okay, so we are in our VMs and template view. We'll right click our VM here. If we come to clone, and I want to clone the template. Okay, so let's give this a name. Okay, let's call this DSL template. All right, DSL template 1. All right, in our inventory structure, this would be on data center 1 at the root there. If we hit next, our compute resource, we want this to be on which server? Let's just leave it at server ESXi 1 or host 1. Okay. We have the option here of changing the disk type. So we want to deploy a thin provision disk here. We leave it at the default data store cluster. Hit next. This would take a couple seconds, and then we would have our VM clone to a template. Okay, so let's just give this a couple seconds, and then we'll see that operation started. All right, so if I hit finish now, this would go ahead. Look at the bottom here. This would go ahead and create our template. Here it is at the bottom. Take a look at this. if you guys notice, right, these are our vApps here. Look at the icons. Okay, these are powered off VM. This is one of VM that is powered on. Okay, and this is one of our appliance. Look at the icon. When we create a template, the icon is different here too. All right. So now that we have a template, we could go within our infrastructure and deploy a VM from that somewhere in the infrastructure. But if you right click here, we have a couple options. All right. Okay, so let's start from our options on top here. We could deploy a new VM from this template. All right. So say we go ahead, we install our guest operating system. Say we are installing Server 2012 from scratch. We install that. We deploy our VM tools. We install all our latest updates onto that VM. Then we could go ahead and clone that to template, or even convert that master copy there of our Windows server. So from there, we would go ahead and deploy a new virtual machine from template. All right. So if that's the case, we'll choose this option. Now let's just do that. Okay. So we would give this virtual machine a name. Let's just call this DSL from template. Okay. So we would choose in our compute resource for this. Let's just work with server ESXi1 again. All right. So it's a thin disk, so let's leave that at the default. We go ahead. We have a couple options to customize our operating system again here. Recall we created a customization specification. We could apply that to this new VM that we're deploying from our template to. But we're not going to do that now. Let's just hit next. We'll have a quick summary of the actions it's going to perform. And then once we hit finish, our new VM generation would start to deploy from this template. All right, so let's just give this a couple seconds more. Okay, great. So finish. That's the reason I use DSL Linux too, because it's pretty small to work with. We should see this in our inventory now. So you see here it is. All right. So this is our VM that we just deployed from our template. Let's go back to our template again here. See what other options we have for working with this. All right. So we could convert this entire VM to this entire template to a virtual machine. We just deployed one from this, right? We could convert the template now to a VM. So after the end of that process, we wouldn't have the template any longer. Or we could clone this template into another template. All right. So let's just do that. All right. Let's just give this a name. Let's call this DSL template 2. All right. So this is template 2. We'll select ESXi1. Leave it at our default data store cluster. Couple seconds more, and then once we finish this, we would have another template that was deployed from this, or cloned from this. All right. All right, so I'll go ahead, hit finish now. So here it is. So we have 2 templates now. Okay. Our other option we have in here is we could convert this virtual machine this template to an actual virtual machine. So let's do that. So at the end of this, we shouldn't have template 1 anymore. All right. So we're converting this template now to a virtual machine. And one of the reasons, as I mentioned previously, you might need to do this is there are some new updates or some other additional software you want to include with that template or that master copy of your VM. So what you would do is convert it to a template, to a VM, make your changes, and then reconvert it back to a template. All right. So if you notice now, we no longer have template 1. Template 1 is here, but this is actually our VM. We could just go ahead and rename this. If you notice, once you right click our template, we don't have the option of powering on this machine like a VM. So you see across here, we could go ahead, power this on, and we could edit the settings for this. Whereas in the actual template, you cannot do that. All right, you have some basic tools you could work with this, renaming, adding some notes to this template. Okay. The other option we have is you could clone this to our library. So basically, we are sending a copy of this template. We are cloning and sending a copy into our content library. But I don't want to do that right now. Let's discuss content libraries and then we'll come back to that. Okay. One other option I want to demonstrate here before we move on is converting an actual virtual machine to a template. We just saw that we could convert a template into virtual machine. This is where we would go to convert the virtual machine to a template. If we right click that and then come into template here, we could just convert from here. All right. So that would just automatically convert our VM to template. That took like 1 or 2 seconds. All right. We have another option here too. If we go back into our VM and then template, we have the option too of exporting this into a OVF template. So basically, if we want to share this with someone, we could just export this VM. We have a name for it here. The format that we want to store this as. Remember I said the OVF is just a bunch of files, whereas the OVA is just a single file. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and select single file. So let's just call this let me just leave the default there. If we had a ISO image attached to this virtual drive for this virtual machine, we could include that image in this export operation too. Okay, so let me just go ahead and do this. Sorry, I didn't choose my location. Let me just do that really fast. Okay, that didn't go too well. Let's just try this again. Let's just try this one more time. All right, so let's go ahead. OVA, choose a location for this desktop. Select our image in this export, and let's try this again. Okay, let's just try this one last time. I already had a file with that name on on my desktop. So let's just do this really fast again. So export this OVA, choose okay, so this is taking a bit. Oh, there it goes. The first time we had a name resolution problem in our environment here. That's why I mentioned in another module, it's very important that we have good name resolution in our infrastructure, both forward and reverse queries configured proper. We want both our hosts to resolve to our host, host to the vCenter server, and the vCenter server could resolve the names for our ESXi host. Okay, so you'd want to set up that infrastructure correct before we get into any of these things with deploying VM and stuff like that. Okay, next I want to demonstrate how we could deploy a virtual machine from an OVAF template that we would have exported. All right, so let's go into our inventory here. If you were to right click somewhere where we want to deploy the template from, and then deploy template, we could either enter the URL for that or just browse for the file where we have it stored. So I have this on my desktop. I'll just select that. This is the DSL Linux that we just exported. All right. So just some basic info here. If it's going to do thin and if it's going to do thick provision, how much space that would use. We could add a description, or sorry, if we had a description, it would have shown up here. Hit next. We want this to deploy to our test VM. Hit next. Our compute resource, we want that to come from ESXi1. All right. So we want this to be thin provision. Leave it at the default, the data store cluster. We have other options here, but we'll go ahead and leave it at the default. It would validate here now, and then we would have our new virtual machine in our infrastructure. For networking, we leave the default network here. You could choose a network where we want to point this to. We leave it to the VM network and just hit finish. All right. If you notice at the bottom here, this is where we'll see when this completed that we have our new virtual machine in our inventory. All right. Okay, let's just try this one more time. This is acting up here. Let's try this one more time. We have the option here to power on after deployment. This should go through now. All right, we won't waste too much time with that. Basically, that's how we would deploy a OVF template. Though for some reason I'm not getting this to work right now. I'll have to take a look back at my infrastructure. So let's move on from here. All right, next I want to demonstrate the creation and importing of objects into our content library. So if we go back to home, all right, home, and then if we go in our inventory here, content library, I have one deploy here, so we'll go ahead and create a new content library. All right, let's just give this a name. All right, so site one. This is our vCenter server. We are pointing this to if you want to add some notes to this. Okay, so these are the options I spoke of earlier. So we have our local content library, which we would be doing now. We could create a published content library so that external users could access this based on the URL. All right. Or we could subscribe to a content library that was already published externally. Okay. So we have a couple options here too. If we were doing a subscribe content library, or if you were subscribing to a content library, um, authentication we could enable. We could set up if we want to download all the contents right now, or if we would download the contents as needed. All right, so I'll go ahead and select a local content library which we want to deploy here, and then here basically the contents for this are stored on your data store. This is where we would configure this or select our data store for this. All right, we have the option for NFS here, but for now, let me see. Okay, let me just do the local data store. All right, we have some summary here. As we can see, this is not published. All right, so let's hit finish and complete this here. All right, so now we have our site one library that we just created. If we click this and go into edit settings, we'll have the option here of publishing this now. We could change that if later we decide to do that. Yeah, so we could delete this if it's no longer needed. We could manage this. Well, we don't have anything inside here currently, so let's go back to where we were previously in our VM and templates view. All right, so let me just get that open, and then we'll put some contents into our library. All right, so let's work back with our DSL Linux again. If we were to right click back this and come to clone, we could clone this VM to template and put a copy of that in our library. So let's do that. Clone to template. It's called DSL. This is the library I had previously, and this is the one we just created. We'll go ahead and select our site one library. All right, and just hit OK on this. All right, this should take a couple seconds. This VM is pretty small. Okay, this is taking a bit longer than I expected. Oh, there it goes. All right, so just want to see one more of our option here. Okay, so let's go back to our content library. Okay, so our site one library. Here is our DSL Linux template that we just brought into this library. All right, it's under related object. All right, summary will show you we have one item there. All right, we could import more items too if we just we could just right click import and then browse for something that we want to import into this library. I don't have anything else I could pull into our library right now, so we'll just leave this off for now. We could import our OVF packages and stuff like that into this. All right, so let's just cancel that for now. The last thing I want to show you guys is how we could actually deploy a VM from here. So let's go back to our host and templates view. We could just anywhere in our inventory here, we could let's go to our test VM folder. We could go to deploy a new VM from library. So now we are deploying a VM from a template that is posted in our library. All right. So this is where we'll do that. And let's hit next. Let's call this DSL3. All right. Okay. Hit next here, and then we would have a new VM deployed from this. All right.